You're listening to
Path of the Jedi
with your host, Ronnie Cruz.
All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this incredible adventure. And yeah, well, welcome to a special unscheduled episode, guys, to celebrate Star Wars Podcast Day. Now, full disclosure and transparency, I had never heard of Star Wars Podcast Day until this afternoon, as a matter of fact. And I had no idea that it was even a thing. Until I got on Twitter, our Twitter account today, and in one of the chat groups that I'm a part of, we have a message thread, and one of the individuals, one of my friends on there said, "Hey, well, happy Star Wars Podcast Day." And I was like, "What? Is that a thing?" And apparently it turns out it is a thing. So I did some research. I was looking it up on the interwebs, and just a brief synopsis of what Star Wars Podcast Day is. So begun in 2021, Star Wars Podcast Day takes place every February 7th, the day Jedi Talk, the very first Star Wars podcast, premiered in 1999, 23 years ago. I honestly didn't even know podcasting existed or was around that time. But apparently it was, and apparently that's when the very first Star Wars podcast started, Jedi Talk. So congratulations to everyone, and thank you to whoever it was that started Jedi Talk those many years ago. And now we have an unofficial day to commemorate not only their accomplishment, but every Star Wars podcast since. So as part of that community, I mean, I can definitely consider myself part of that community. Path of the Jedi is very much a Star Wars podcast. At least I feel like it is. That's the intention of why I created this thing in the first place. But in commemoration of Star Wars Podcast Day, I wanted to record this special episode, unscheduled episode for you guys. Now, for me, Star Wars Podcast Day, it's a celebration for sure. More than anything, at least from my perspective and from where I'm sitting, it's a celebration of you guys, our listeners, right? Because without you guys, there would be no show. I mean, obviously there is definitely a degree of the fact that I do this for myself and I love doing this and I would do it regardless. But you know, obviously there's a community aspect to it, right? There's you guys out there that I'm doing it for. Right, that I strive to be better at doing this for you guys, right, and to continue to bring you quality content. So this is for me very much a celebration of all you guys that are just happy to tune in and that are willing to tune in to the show each and every week. So I applaud you guys and I celebrate you guys. I want to thank you guys and show you guys my gratitude by putting out this special episode this week. And again, hopefully, recording right now, it's 7:26 p.m. on the East Coast. So hopefully I can get it out, recorded and edited and published in time to hit Star Wars Day. That said, what kind of content are we going to talk about today? It's completely unscheduled. We're not going to be talking about Book of Boba Fett because we're saving that for our regular Wednesday release. So today I wanted to talk about, since we're celebrating, I want to talk about things I'm grateful for, right? And in the form of my top five. And people love, right? You guys love top five counts, right? Top five lists, right? And I love top five lists. I love listening to people's top five lists. So I wanted to share with you guys my top five, like most nostalgic memories of Star Wars, right? Because for me, part of nostalgia is just having that feeling of gratitude for the experience, right? Nostalgia is gratitude for the experience and being able to have that feeling, to be able to kind of relive that feeling through memory. And through sharing that memory with others. So if you guys are willing, I would love to go down memory lane with you guys and share my top five most nostalgic memories of Star Wars. Okay, so making this list is much more difficult than I thought it was originally going to be. I thought I was going to be able to come in here and knock this recording out in like 15, 20 minutes, edit it in another 15 to 20 minutes, and then be done and have it posted and listed. But, you know, going back through the recesses of my mind and my memory, it's really hard to narrow it down to five things that I love about Star Wars, or the top five most memorable, nostalgic things that I have with Star Wars. because there's so many. There's just so many, right? Like for me as a fan, who, as I've mentioned in some past episodes, I've pretty much Star Wars has been a presence in my life for the majority of my life, right? The from the original trilogies moving forward, and so. I have so many memories that revolve around Star Wars. So just understand that this list is not, it's not all inclusive, right? There's so many other things and other memories that I could share with you guys that could very well easily make it to this list. So I just picked the 5 that popped in my head the quickest, and I've done my best to rank those. And even the rankings aren't 100% like, okay, this is accurate and this is my favorite. I like this one better than that one. It's really just a matter of, okay, let me just put a little bit of weight on this grading scale and share this with you guys. So again, it's a very loose ranking, and it's definitely not inclusive of all my favorite memories of Star Wars. Just 5 things that happen to pop in my head, and hopefully you guys have fun and enjoying getting a peek of the things of some of my memories that I have and hold with me about Star Wars. So let's kick it off with number 5. All right, number 5, I have a memory of watching the Return of the Jedi behind the scenes footage and the making of footage. And all of this stuff was really, for me, mind-blowing at the time. So this was the 80s. I was with some friends, and we were at their beach house for like a week. I was, fortunate enough to be able to go with them. They invited me to go with them to their family trip at the beach. And so our friends, my friends and I, we were watching this Star Wars Return of the Jedi VHS, and I guess they had some behind the scenes and making of feature as part of that VHS tape. And I remember we watched that thing so many times on that trip because it was just so mind blowing, right? All the little, especially like the special effects, right? As a kid, you're like, you getting a sneak peek at how that movie magic is made was so mind blowing for us. And like I was like, man, like I already love the movie, and getting a chance to see this behind the scenes stuff and making up stuff gave me an even deeper love and appreciation for filmmaking, and especially for Star Wars, because like, you got to understand at that time, access to behind the scene footage and making of footage was rare. You rarely got to see a peek at that, right? I mean, this was the days before, quick access to the internet, where, pretty much like all information is out there immediately as soon as it's released. So like we didn't have any of that. And so to be able to kind of get a sneak peek at it, I was addicted. I mean, I was already addicted to Star Wars at that point, and getting to see behind the curtain, I fell in love with, Star Wars even more. And then I really started to fall in love with the magic of movie making, which to this day I have a very deep appreciation for. I mean, I've had the fortunate privilege to work on some films in my in my history, in my long and crazy personal history, and as arduous and as difficult and as laborious as it can be, it's so much fun. That creative process and filmmaking, and then seeing how it was done for Star Wars, something that I absolutely loved. It was such a great time, and so fun to watch. That it stuck to this day. Like, again, it's one of those things. It's made such an imprint on me as a child that I hold that memory to this very day. Yep. All right, number 4 on the list. I put this because I had such a great time. I was in high school. We were on a high school trip. I was part of our high school show choir, our chorus, and our specific class went down that year to participate in a competition, I believe it was, down in Florida, in Orlando. And part of that trip, we got a chance to go to, I believe at that time it was MGM Studios, right? This was late spring of 1993, if memory serves me correctly. It was a while back. So we were there down in Orlando, and during our kind of leisure time and recreational time, we got a chance to go to MGM Studios, and of course, what's at MGM Studios at that time? Star Tours, right? Star Tours. So I remember walking and getting on that ride through Star Tours, which first of all, getting to walk through that queue, through the line, through the scenery of, Endor. If you guys have been to Hollywood Studios now, it's still there. You still have the same queue with the at and walking through the legs and walking through the forest and all that stuff. So that was already amazing. And then getting on the ride itself, I had no idea what to expect, and I had never been on that type of ride that I remember, those simulator kind of rides. So, I didn't know what it would be like, what the experience would be like, and so getting on that ride and for the first time being immersed in a Star Wars experience like that, I had an absolute blast. I don't know how the rest of my classmates felt that got on that ride with me, but I absolutely love it. I mean, first of all, the ride is incredibly fun as it is, right? It takes you through, and you get kind of tossed around in the simulator, and add to that the fact that it's Star Wars themed, right? So automatically it's something that I'm gonna love. Because of that, and it's an incredible, like, technologically it was another groundbreaking kind of ride, right? Again, Star Wars and Lucas was always pushing the boundaries of technology and experiencing Star Wars and experiencing that world. And so that sticks with me today, riding that ride for the first time. And I will say that every time I go to Hollywood Studios, I do ride that ride. I still get as much enjoyment out of Star Tours to this day. For those of you guys who know me and listen to me regularly, pre-COVID, I was going down to Disney, 4 or 5 times a year. And that was definitely always on the list, Star Tours, and of course now they have Galaxy's Edge, which is even crazier. And okay, so see, riding Rise of the Resistance for the first time and Smuggler's Run, that's honorable mentions, right? They're not on this particular top 5 list, but definitely honorable mentions. If you guys haven't gone to see those rides or to experience those rides in either Disney World or Disneyland, I encourage you, make time to do it. Like if you're on vacation in either of those areas, make time to go to Disney to ride those specific rides, because it is something else. It will knock your socks off, really, being there and experiencing just how immersive and realistic those things are. It'll knock your socks off, and it did mine. Again, those didn't make the list. Honorable mentions. The one that does make the list for today is riding the Star Tours for the very first time back all those years ago when I was in high school. All right, number three. This is a good one, and these have all been kind of fun, but this is where it starts to get really fun, because this particular nostalgic memory, it's more recent than the other ones. I think it might be, it's the most recent of all the ones that I'm talking about today, and it sticks in my mind because it's a shared experience, right? I was in a giant room with, I don't know, it must have been 10,000 people, and this was Star Wars Celebration 2015 in Anaheim. I think it was 15. 2015 in Anaheim, and we were, my friend and I were in the main room for that general session. I can't remember what that particular panel or general session was, but it was the big one, right? It was the big event of Celebration. We were able to get in because we slept at the thing. We got in line all night. We were there for a long time, and we were able to get into that main room. And part of that session was they played the trailer for The Force Awakens. They had released the trailer for that Force Awakens. And so a couple of things you got to understand about this experience, guys. Everyone in that room, all of us in the audience, had lined up the day before, right? So we had been waiting, and we had been lined up. Most of us, if not all of us, slept on a concrete floor in line, and so all of us are really, really loopy. We're lack of sleep, but we're all having the best of time, because that's what Star Wars Celebration is all about, right? You're just there to celebrate Star Wars, and then on top of that, we get the trailer release of a Star Wars movie, and we hadn't had a Star Wars movie since Revenge of the Sith, right? Since Revenge of the Sith all those years ago. So this was going to be the first Star Wars movie release in all those years, and this was the first time the trailer was going to drop for Force Awakens. And so all of us are completely sleep deprived. We're all excited. The session was already amazing. Like, we had J.J. Abrams, all the cast came out. We got to meet BB-8 for the first time. Like, that alone blew my mind, right? BB-8 rolls out onto the stage. I'm like, how is this technology even possible? A rolling ball with a head that's staying on, like, that just blew all of our minds, right? We thought we were seeing things, but the peak of this experience was when that trailer dropped, right? That trailer dropped, the crowd, the room goes silent, and we were all glued to the screen. And of course, they've got like $1 million screen set up. The audio was amazing. It's like we were watching the movie, 10,000 of us, right, watching the movie. And at the very end of that trailer, for those of you guys who don't remember, at the very end of that trailer, you hear the voice of Harrison Ford as Han Solo for the first time in, I don't know how many, like, at that point, 30 years, I guess, right? And he says, "Chewie, we're home." And the crowd went absolutely nuts. We went absolutely bonkers. I know I had tears in my eyes. I'm sure my friend sitting next to me had tears in his eyes as well. I mean, it's a moment that you could never ever synthesize ever again, right? Like, it was once in a lifetime situation where everybody was sharing this experience. We had all been waiting, 30 years to hear Han Solo's voice. We'd been waiting all those years to get another Star Wars movie, and that trailer dropping the way it did, and to hear his voice as he walks onto the Millennium Falcon, of all things, to say, "Chewie, we're home." It was there's no words for that kind of experience, right? And I'm really grateful and fortunate to have been able to experience that, and been there for that moment. That is definitely one of those things that's going to stick in my mind for the rest of my life. All right, we are getting down to the wire, and we're at number 2 already. Holy cow, number 2. Okay, so number 2 on my list of most memorable nostalgia moments in my Star Wars history is lining up for the Phantom Menace, right? Lining up for the Phantom Menace to see it. Now, so this was back in the days when, first of all, we had midnight movies, right? So the movie would be released, let's say, on a Friday, and so because midnight was Friday, they would have a midnight showing, and so we would have to line up just before pre-sales, line up for to get a ticket early, and then line up to get good seats, right? To make sure you got good seats. And so there were times that I remember, especially for Star Wars, lining up for hours and hours ahead of time, right? Just so that we can have the full experience. We're not like, sitting at the very front of the movie theater where you can, feel like you're looking up the actors' noses, right? And so we would do that for all of the Star Wars, the prequels when they were released, and it was such a special time with Phantom Menace in particular, because again, we hadn't had a Star Wars in the movie theaters since Return of the Jedi, right? Like, I hadn't seen, I remember seeing Return of the Jedi in the movie theaters, but there hadn't been a Star Wars movie since then in the theaters, and so just the excitement around that was just, it was palpable for sure, and to have so many Star Wars fans out there, again, sharing this common experience, it's something that we can't really, like, I don't know that is a thing anymore today, right? Lining up for that long for a movie, because now you get pre-sales, you can buy online, you can even pick your seats in most theaters at this point. So there's never that situation where we're all waiting anymore to experience this movie together, right? I mean, we can still watch the movie together, but there's not that waiting game in the meantime, right? And this was all before smartphones and things like that, where you just had to actually sit there and talk to each other and meet people, to make the time go by, right? And again, as Star Wars fans, there's always so much to talk about, right? And so I really, that sticks in my memory, having just that excitement, building up to just the excitement of sitting in line, right? Like being excited to sit in line for hours and hours at a time, and outdoors too, right? Because they didn't have room inside the lobby of the theaters, that we'd have to wait outside on the sidewalks. Being excited to do that, right, for hours at a time, it's just, it's a time in history, in movie history, as a moviegoer, that we won't ever get again, because of technology. And then of course seeing the Lucasfilm logo come up on screen, and then the opening scroll, it's like like after having not seen it for 20 years. And then to see it again for Phantom Menace, it was just, It's one of those things, right? Like when you see that in the movie theater, it's one of those things. It's like, man, it's a great time to be alive. There's Star Wars playing on a movie theater. So that will always stick in my mind, especially because that type of experience of again, getting to wait in line, building that excitement, that anticipation to watch the movie. It's not really, it can't be replicated anymore, right? That situation and that experience doesn't exist. So that definitely is very, very high up on my list.
I'm going in. Cover me, Porkins.
All right, so we're down to number one, and I think this is something that for most, if not all, Star Wars fans is going to be their number one, right? The first time they experienced or saw Star Wars. For me, it was when I first watched Part 1, the original Part 1, A New Hope, and it was at a friend's house, and this friend in particular, I mean, they were a little well off, right? And so they always had like the latest technology, satellite TV, when satellite TVs, there's huge satellites that look like actual satellites that were, like space satellites, right? Like they were humongous things. And so my friend had a big screen TV, right? A big screen TV. And at that time, big screen TVs were really, I mean, like they were fancy. Like those things were not cheap. Like today, you have your big flat screens. Pretty much every household has a giant flat screen TV. But back then, these things were, first of all, they were enormous, right? Like these things were floor to ceiling, like massive pieces of furniture, right? That took up entire rooms. And it was just like this wooden box where the front opens up, like there's two panels that open up sideways and a front panel that opens up down. It's hard to describe unless you actually see it. And so it's all wood. The front panel opens down, and that piece has like the actual projector. It had like 3 different lights on it: the red, green, blue, I think it was, from what I remember. And I remember specifically like putting my hand in front of me, like, wow, my hand shadow on the screen of the TV was red, blue, and green. So those lights, or whatever it was, the projector mechanism, and I was really too young to understand it, but the projector mechanism would project the image of the movie or onto, I don't know what kind of screen it was, but like, again, it was a huge deal. It was a TV that was a big screen TV. Those were big screen TVs back then. And so he had one of these enormous TVs, like, again, floor to ceiling. It was enormous. And on that, he was playing. They were watching Star Wars, the original Star Wars. And so my first experience with Star Wars, I was too young to have seen it in the theater, but this was one of my earliest memories of being here in the U.S. was seeing Star Wars on that enormous, gargantuan television. Of course, as a child, to me, it looked like an entire, like it was bigger than a car in my mind. Watching it on this large screen TV in the early 80s, I'm sure it must have been a Betamax or maybe a VHS at that point. But just being blown away, right? Being blown away by this larger than life image, larger than life story, this tale, this fantastic tale that takes place in a galaxy far, far away, where there's people that had magic and laser swords and laser guns, and I was such sucked in. I was so sucked in. I remember specifically a memory of seeing that scene where they're in the Millennium Falcon and Luke and Han are in the different gun turrets, firing and shooting at the TIE fighters that were chasing them. And that scene, that particular scene, sticks in my head as the scene that I remember watching on that TV. But yeah, and it just like I was in awe. I was in awe at what I was watching. Not only because it was on a ginormous piece of machinery that I had never seen in anyone else's house other than that house. Like I only thought that was available to rich and famous, right? For those of you guys who were alive at that time, there was that show Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and so like I only imagined TVs like this in people's houses who were Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous. Of course, they were relatively well off. It's something that I knew that we could never have in our household, but being able to watch it there and then seeing Star Wars larger than life on that screen, it was just, I don't know. I think no matter how I watched Star Wars, I would have been attached to it anyways. But then seeing it in that format, especially as young and impressionable as I was, seeing it on that ginormous television, I'm sure, and again, my memory might be exaggerated, but I felt like the characters and the actors on the screen were bigger than I was, and they very well could have been, because I was a small kid. I still am. Right. So yeah, I mean, watching Star Wars for the first time in that format on that Friends TV, it's stuck with me ever since. Right. Like, yeah, Han and Luke shooting TIE fighters. Great kid, don't get cocky. Right. Like that scene. It was just amazing, right? It was amazing. I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. And I've never seen anything like that before the way I saw it, right? So that's my number one, guys. Seeing Star Wars, A New Hope for the very first time on a large, ginormous, big screen 80s TV, projector TV, right? I'm really dating myself, but hey, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. So yeah, those are my top 5, guys. Top 5 things I'm most nostalgic about regarding Star Wars. And again, it's really, for me, nostalgia is sharing my gratitude, how thankful I am that I experienced those things so much that I want to relive them in memory, right? They're stuck in there. So I love sharing it with you guys for that very reason, because I enjoy those memories. And so I hope you enjoy hearing about those memories. And on top of that, I want to hear what your top 5 most nostalgic memories are about Star Wars, right? No matter when you started coming into the fandom, no matter when you got introduced to Star Wars, what are your top 5 memories that you remember that stick in your mind, that are the most nostalgic, that kind of have the most meaning for you as an experience, right? I'd love to hear it, guys. Send that to me in an email, or you can record an MP3 and email it to me as well. Shoot that over to me at info@pathofthejedi.com, or you can let us know on our Twitter. It's at POTJ podcast. Same thing for our Facebook as well. Any of those things, let us know, man. I really want to hear what your top 5 most nostalgic moments from Star Wars are. What are the things that you really cling on to as a fan, and what sticks in your memory? Again, you can email, send an email or MP3 to info@path. Man, I can't talk right now. Send an email or an MP3 to info@pathofthejedi.com, or hit me up on our Twitter or Facebook. It's at POTJ Podcast. So again, thank you guys for tuning in to this special episode. It is in commemoration and celebration of Star Wars Podcast Day. This is the second unofficial annual. It's the second annual unofficial Star Wars Podcast Day to celebrate and commemorate the very first Star Wars podcast back in 1999 that was released on February 7th. So again, thank you for joining me. And for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is not so much a celebration of what we do here in the space as podcasters, but for really a celebration and a show of appreciation for you guys out there who continue to listen, who continue to support and engage with what we do, right? Without you guys, there would be no podcast podcasting space. Without you guys, without you Star Wars fans out there would be no Star Wars podcast. So really, this day, this Star Wars podcast day, more than anything for me, is commemoration of each and every one of you. So with that, don't forget to tune in on Wednesday with our fresh new regular episode of the week, where we're going to be talking about Book of Boba Fett Chapter 4 and all the amazing lessons that we can learn from Boba and his crazy experiences that he's going through right now. And then, that's it. If you guys need anything or have any questions about anything, please feel free to hit me up on any of our socials or on an email. And then, of course, if you haven't rated and reviewed, please do so on the platforms that have that option available. I know Apple Podcasts and Audible you can rate, so do that. That would really help us a lot here, so people get the can get the word out about the show. And of course, if you feel like sharing it, please by all means share the podcast. If you're enjoying us here, if you're enjoying the content at Path of the Jedi podcast, I would appreciate you sharing it, right? Like, because the chances are, if you are getting something out of this content, if you are learning from this content, if you're appreciating this content, chances are somebody else out there will appreciate it as well. So please feel free to share and let people know that you're listening to Path of the Jedi. Beyond that, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Until then, be well, be safe, and as always, may the Force be with you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company nor Lucasfilm Limited, and is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names and sounds and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is intellectual property of Path of the Jedi unless otherwise indicated.